all SpongeBob episodes are made equally. Some are downright spooky. These are the episodes you should never watch. We're kicking things off with Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost, an episode where Squidward makes the poor decision to convince SpongeBob and Patrick he's dead. So the episode begins as Squidward finishes making a wax sculpture of himself. He's decided that he's basically mastered all forms of art, like everything, which is kind of wild because he's pretty bad at basically all art. But he's feeling pretty good about it until SpongeBob and Patrick start playing a loud game right outside. So Squidward heads off to take a bath, hoping to escape the noise and float in his dirt and whatever. But SpongeBob and Patrick decide to play catch with a shell, which accidentally flies into Squidward's house, knocking over the wax sculpture he made. They freak out thinking they've seriously injured Squidward, or literally broken him. After a bunch of panicked and ridiculous attempts to revive him, they have to accept the truth. Squidward is dead. What a tragic loss for the miserable octopus community. Right on cue, Squidward steps out of the bathroom covered in talcum powder and wearing a white bathrobe, so SpongeBob and Patrick are so stupid that they're convinced they're looking at Squidward's ghost. Because what other explanation could there be for an octopus in whiteface? In a desperate attempt to avoid his revenge, they promise to obey him and follow his every command. Well, now that's just a freebie. Squidward decides not to correct them. He plays along, turning them into his personal servants to pamper him and do all his chores. Honestly, good move on his part to use these morons for something useful. So at one point, SpongeBob and Patrick are cleaning Squidward's room and they stumble across a comic book about the Flying Dutchman. The story explains how the Dutchman haunts the ocean because his body wasn't properly laid to rest. Actually, it was used in a window display, which, to be fair, is a pretty creative use of what might be the ugliest pirate to ever walk the ocean. SpongeBob and Patrick immediately think of Squidward and decide that they need to give him a proper burial to prevent him from becoming a restless spirit, or killing them, or both. They totally ignore Squidward's objections, planning an over-the-top funeral complete with mourners and everything.
Oh, Squidward! We all came as soon as we were sure you were dead.
And for his part, Squidward tries to come clean, admitting that he isn't actually dead and was just pretending to take advantage of them and make them somewhat useful in life. But SpongeBob and Patrick are convinced he's in denial about his own death. So, just to make sure that this guy accepts his fate, SpongeBob blows a massive bubble that traps Squidward and sends him floating out of the ocean and up into the sky, which they believe is the great beyond. So basically, they just straight up killed the guy. As Squidward floats through the air, he's swarmed by a flock of seagulls, making the whole situation even more miserable for him. So while SpongeBob and Patrick think they've done a good deed, Squidward is left floating helplessly for the rest of his life, regretting ever pretending to be a ghost in the first place. Because that's why we watch SpongeBob, right? Weird existential horror? Well, Squidward is pretty clearly dead in this episode, which is actually one of the happier endings of the series. Because this next episode, the camping episode, definitely has him wishing for it all to end. Alright, so the episode opens with Squidward ready to enjoy a peaceful weekend, thinking he's finally gonna get some peace and quiet without SpongeBob and Patrick doing their usual nonsense. These two brain-dead morons are going camping, giving him a break from tolerating their 2 IQ schemes. But of course, they're not camping in the wilderness. That's dangerous and stupid. They're camping right in SpongeBob's front yard, 10 feet away from Squidward's house. So obviously Squidward's angry. He can't have his comfortable, relaxing bath knowing these two are still breathing. He storms out to tell them they can't call it camping if they're still on SpongeBob's lawn. But SpongeBob is all like, "It doesn't matter where you camp as long as you're in the wilderness," with that goofy grin on his face as if he's in the Amazon and not Bikini Bottom. Squidward feels insulted because it's like they're suggesting he's not manly enough to camp. I mean, the guy who loves opera and clarinet and fancy stuff and has a weird relationship with that Squilliam dude is not manly? Nah, bro. So in typical Squidward fashion, he joins in just to prove he's the real camper here. He tries to show them what real camping looks like, but he screws it up because, of course, he can't even set up a tent. So he gives up and decides to sleep under the stars, trying to keep some dignity. What little he has left, anyway. Next, they start roasting marshmallows, and things are kinda chill until Patrick keeps sending flaming marshmallows straight into Squidward's face, which just ticks him off more. But then Spongebob busts out the campfire song, and Squidward just hates it. More than anything.
C-A-M-P-F-I-R-E-S-O-N-G song, Patrick!
Son! C-A-M-P-F-I-R...
Squidward! Good! It'll help! It'll help! If you just sing along! Oh, yeah!
So, to make things worse, he starts playing his clarinet, which is terrible as always. Spongebob freaks out, shoving a marshmallow into Squidward's clarinet hole to make him shut the heck up. But not because it sucks. Well, maybe that too. But because sea bears are apparently attracted to bad music. Squidward's like, "Sea bears aren't real, you brain-dead idiots." But Spongebob and Patrick insist they are and show him some ridiculous proof from magazines. Like one headline that says, "I married a sea bear." I really don't want to think about how that works. Now, Squidward, being the jerk he is, starts doing everything they say attracts sea bears just to mock them. He's stomping around, wearing a sombrero all goofy, waving a flashlight. Full-on psychotic breakdown, basically. Spongebob and Patrick beg him to stop, but he thinks he's hilarious. Then a real sea bear shows up, and this thing is angry. It straight up mauls Squidward right in front of them, and while Spongebob and Patrick are safe in their anti-sea bear circle, Squidward's getting his ass handed to him. And I'm gonna be real, he had it coming. So, after getting mauled repeatedly for, walking and crawling, he finally leaps into the circle for protection. The bear takes one last look at him, growls like, "Don't even think about it," and then bails entirely. I guess consent is important even to a predator like that. Squidward's all relieved, thinking he's finally safe, but then Spongebob casually mentions something about sea rhinoceroses. Squidward freaks out, asking what attracts them, and Patrick's like, "Oh, the sound of a sea bear attack." Right on cue, a sea rhinoceros shows up, and Squidward, poor dude, doesn't have his anti-sea rhinoceros underpants on. I guess sometimes it does pay to listen to Spongebob and Patrick. This next episode is not one of them. The Curse of Bikini Bottom sees SpongeBob and Patrick annoying off the Flying Dutchman by messing with his romantic life. Alright, so this episode starts with SpongeBob and Patrick being bored as usual because they have nothing worthwhile to live for, so they decide the best way to kill time is to annoy the hell out of Squidward. They bust into his shed, and these two morons are like, "Hey, can we borrow your lawnmower?" Squidward, who's literally one mental breakdown away from ending it all at this point, is just like, whatever, maybe they'll kill themselves with it, and hands it over. Like he actually wants them to die so he doesn't have to unalive himself. The guy needs help. So, it all goes downhill from there. SpongeBob and Patrick are riding the lawnmower, tearing it up, flying all over the place, and before you know it, they've gone full dumbass mode and end up in a cemetery. Who cares about the dead, right? Meanwhile, underground, the Flying Dutchman is doing something totally normal. He's picking out a shirt for his date. You know, because ghost pirates need to get down to business too. Just as he finds the perfect one, those morons upstairs are shaking the ground like crazy, running over his grave repeatedly. They fling dirt all over his place, ruining his fit. So the Dutchman rises from the grave all angry, and what happens? These jacks mow his freaking beard off. He's mad now. They just totally tanked his Riz. So he straight up loses it, stops them in their tracks, and starts going off about how they've completely screwed up his whole look. He looks like a loser now, like them. SpongeBob and Patrick try to apologize, saying they didn't know what it's like to be a ghost. The Dutchman is like, "Fine, you want to know what it's like? Boom, you're ghosts now until my beard grows back. You should have thought about that." So now, SpongeBob and Patrick are ghosts, but instead of laying low, they decide to screw around some more. They float over to Squidward's garden and try to scare the heck out of him, but as usual, Squidward's not having it, so he just hoses them down like they're mangy stray dogs. Which they kinda are generally, but hey, at least they're dead! At this point, it's nighttime and SpongeBob tries to get back into his house, but guess what? Everything just falls through him. His key, his door, you name it. Even when he finally makes it to bed, the poor dude falls through the floors all the way down into the earth. The next morning, these idiots are running on no sleep, but SpongeBob drags his tired, ghostly ass to work at the Krusty Krab anyway, but everything goes to hell. His spatula falls through him, and even worse, the food just falls right through him too. Patrick shows up with his own set of problems, like food going straight through his body and grossing everyone out. He's basically crapping himself before he's even eaten, I guess. Of course, the customers freak out and run away, thinking they're being haunted by mermaids. Really? Mermaids? Open the damn schools. The two dumbasses are officially done with ghost life, so they head back to the cemetery to beg the Dutchman to fix this mess, which, again, they started by being total morons. The Flying Dutchman tries to undo the curse, but he's useless. Turns out the curse won't lift until his beard grows back. Yeah, he needs Riz and Aura to do anything productive. It's weirdly relatable. But since he's got a hot date coming up, SpongeBob and Patrick offer to help him out with a makeover. So by the end, SpongeBob actually becomes the Dutchman's beard. Yeah, let that sink in. SpongeBob is sitting on his face. Okay. A few months later, SpongeBob and Patrick are back to their regular stupid selves, and SpongeBob wonders how the Dutchman's date went. Right on cue, the Dutchman shows up absolutely losing his mind because his girlfriend wants to marry him. He's all, "I'm not the marrying type." My guy just wants to clap some cheeks and run to the next girl. Out of nowhere, his date shows up, and she is this massive, terrifying monster. The Dutchman screams and flies off into the distance, leaving SpongeBob and Patrick standing there like, what the hell just happened? I'm 99% sure he got her pregnant and ran. Maybe that's just the Bikini Bottom way, to screw up royally and then flee the scene. It's definitely what Squidward does when he almost murders Gary in I Was a Teenage Gary. At least there are consequences. So it all kicks off with SpongeBob screwing around with Gary when Patrick rolls in, all hyped about some jellyfishing convention happening over in Ukulele Bottom. SpongeBob's stoked too, but then realizes he can't take Gary with him. So he runs over to Squidward of all people and basically begs him to look after Gary while he's gone. Squidward, of course, couldn't care less, but SpongeBob's laying it on thick, showing him the whole routine, even whipping out these giant cans of snail food labeled morning and night, like Squidward's some kind of dumbass who can't tell the time. But whatever, Squidward agrees to just get SpongeBob and Patrick out of his face. The second they leave, Squidward's like, yeah, forget that, and spends the whole weekend lounging around like the lazy piece of he is. Meanwhile, Gary's inside, totally forgotten, starving his little snail ass off, getting weaker and weaker. We flash forward to SpongeBob coming home, all happy, and then Squidward has that oh no moment when he realizes he completely forgot about Gary. Panic sets in, so he runs inside like a maniac, only to find Gary looking like death warmed over, all shriveled up from not eating or drinking for days. He basically just killed this snail. How can he fix this? Squidward, still in full-on freak-out mode, tries to shove food at Gary, but it's way too late. Gary's too weak to even eat. As if things couldn't get worse, SpongeBob's about to walk through the door, so Squidward tries to shove all of Gary's food into his own mouth to hide his screw-up. When SpongeBob finally walks in, Squidward's standing there looking sketchy as hell, mumbling something about checking on Gary, but Gary slinks into the room looking like he's about to die, and SpongeBob immediately knows something's up, because how could he not? SpongeBob goes full panic mode and calls the vet, Dr. Gilgilliam, who casually tells him Gary needs a shot of snail plasma to survive. But Dr. Gill's a complete coward, so he tells SpongeBob to do it himself, who begs Squidward to do it. Squidward, totally over this, agrees, but SpongeBob's so nervous he's jerking Gary around like a madman. In the chaos, Squidward ends up injecting the plasma right into SpongeBob's nose. SpongeBob freaks out thinking he's gonna die, but Squidward's just like, you'll be fine. If he dies, it might be a good thing. But he's not fine. Next thing you know, SpongeBob's acting all sluggish and weird. Then his arms and legs vanish, and then he's a snail. He starts meowing and slithering around, and naturally, Squidward loses his mind. He locks all the doors, tries to barricade himself in, but Snail SpongeBob's chasing him all over the house like a creepy little slug. And because this is SpongeBob, Squidward somehow ends up injecting himself with the plasma too. Now they're both snails, slithering around and meowing like a couple of morons. By the end, it's just Gary, Snail Spongebob, and Snail Squidward sitting on a fence, meowing together like it's the most normal thing in the world. Patrick, who's just trying to get some damn sleep, throws a boot at them and tells them to shut the hell up. But nope, they just keep on meowing. It really seems like there's no hope they will ever shut the hell up at this point. Even when they're confined to some floating ship in the sky like in Shanghai, they still find some way to mess stuff up. So the day starts off pretty normal for SpongeBob. He's pouring a box of Kelpo, stoked for some lame prize inside. But nope, not a goddamn thing in the box. Already off to a terrible start. Then, out of nowhere, a huge-ass anchor smashes right into his house. Does SpongeBob freak out like a normal person? Hell no! He thinks it's some kind of baby that fell from the sky. He's that dumb. So what does he do? Runs straight over to Squidward's house to show off this sky baby nonsense. Obviously, Squidward shuts down their stupidity like, "Are you two out of your minds?" But then Patrick shows up and also thinks it's a baby. Yep, definitely a sky baby. Squidward tries to kick their dumbasses out when suddenly the anchor wrecks his house too. Now Squidward's angry. He's not gonna sit there and let some anchor destroy his place, so he starts climbing up the damn rope, ready to give the owner a piece of his mind. Naturally, SpongeBob and Patrick follow along. Turns out the anchor belongs to none other than the Flying Dutchman. Yeah, they climbed right onto his ghost ship. Squidward's crapping himself, but SpongeBob and Patrick are just like, "Oh, hey Dutchman, Squidward wants to whine about your stupid anchor." And now Squidward's really screwed. The Dutchman gives him a proper scorching and tells them they're all part of his crew forever, just because they set foot on the ship. Of course, SpongeBob and Patrick try to escape, but every time they jump off, they just land back on the ship. They're trapped. Squidward's not having any of this forever crew stuff, so the Dutchman tosses him into the Fly of Despair, which is basically some hellish zipper dimension straight out of an acid trip nightmare. SpongeBob and Patrick reluctantly agree to help the Dutchman terrorize Bikini Bottom, except their idea of terror isn't what the Dutchman wants. So now the Dutchman's fed up with their BS and decides, "Screw it, I'm just gonna eat you two." Wait, what? Locked in a room, SpongeBob and Patrick realize their only way out is through the perfume department, which sounds dumb as hell, but it's actually a living hell. After barely surviving, they steal the Dutchman's dining sock, which they overheard is essential for him to eat. They get caught, but they manage to strike a deal. The sock, in exchange for 3 wishes. Patrick blows the first wish on some dumb idea, wishing they'd known about the wishes earlier. God damn it. Then SpongeBob wastes the second wish to bring Squidward back. Squidward, who had just escaped the Fly of Despair and made it home to Bikini Bottom, gets dragged back into the nightmare. Now they've only got 1 wish left, and the Dutchman, being a total jerk, decides to pick the winner with Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. SpongeBob wins, and what does he wish for? The Dutchman to become a vegetarian. Problem solved, right? They think they're home free until they realize they've been turned into fruit and are now sitting in the Dutchman's blender. The episode ends with them running for their lives as the now hippie Dutchman chases them in a peace-loving van. And if the idea of being chased by a hippie pirate doesn't scare you, then nothing will. Except for maybe a giant unstoppable worm who wants to eat everybody and everything in its path. It's Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. So, it's the middle of the night, and some massive unseen creature is just tearing through Bikini Bottom like it's a buffet, chomping down on everything in its path, eventually taking a huge bite out of SpongeBob's pineapple. SpongeBob wakes up just in time to see the big guy. It's the Alaskan bullworm. Next morning at the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob's telling everyone about this monster, and the whole town's already seen it. Now everyone's losing their minds trying to figure out how to deal with this giant worm that's out to destroy everything. Patrick, our resident pain in the ass, comes up with the most brilliant idea: let's just push the whole town somewhere else. Squidward immediately shuts that down, but honestly, no one's got a better idea. The whole town's brain dead at this point. Then someone pipes up, "We need a hero!" But Krabs is like, "Nah, no one's dumb enough to go after this thing." Enter Sandy. She strolls up, tail half-eaten, mad, and ready to kick some worm ass. The crowd loves it. They're all cheering her on like she's gonna be the town's savior. Meanwhile, SpongeBob's freaking the heck out trying to convince Sandy not to go after the thing. But Sandy, she's having none of it. She's full-on Texas tough, thinking she can take down this worm like it's no big deal. Typical American. Off she goes, and loyal SpongeBob, terrified, runs after her. Back in town, the citizens decide, screw it, maybe Patrick's dumbass idea isn't so dumb after all. Which of course it is, because it's Patrick's idea. So they actually start pushing the entire town away from the worm. SpongeBob finally catches up with Sandy, still begging her to not go through with this dumb plan. He even pulls out what he thinks is her tail. It's just a paperclip and some string. Sandy's too stubborn to listen and marches right into this giant cave. SpongeBob's got bad vibes about it, but Sandy? Nope. She thinks she's already won. She's an American after all. Illegal invasion is kind of an American tradition. She ties up what she thinks is the worm, showing it off like a trophy, but nah, fam. It's the tongue. Yeah, the actual worm is the cave. The moment of realization hits, and they both book it the hell out of there with the real Alaskan bullworm chasing their asses. While they're running for their lives, SpongeBob can't help but hit Sandy with the "told you so." Sandy, in all her badass glory, finally admits he was right. Then, in a last-ditch move, she whips out that paperclip and string, swings them both to safety as the worm tumbles off a cliff. They're feeling pretty damn good about themselves, all victorious, heading back to town. But guess what? Those morons in Bikini Bottom pushed the whole town right to the bottom of that cliff. Just as they arrive, the giant worm crashes down and flattens the entire place. The worm lets out a tiny ouch, and that's it. Bikini Bottom's toast. So I guess we have to say goodbye to Bikini Bottom for good. But Mr. Krabs will miss the customers most of all. Well, the dollars, as seen in the episode Clams, where he's willing to sacrifice anything for $1. So we start at the Krusty Krab, and there's this indecisive customer holding up the line. Dude has no idea what to order. SpongeBob chimes in all cheerful and suggests the guy try the coral bits for $1. But then Mr. Krabs bursts out, losing his mind because this dollar just so happens to be his 1,000,000th dollar earned. He's so pumped he congratulates SpongeBob and Squidward on conning another sucker, and says they're all going on a surprise trip to celebrate. Squidward thinks they're going somewhere fancy like Pamper Island or some high-end spa. Yeah, guess again, buddy. Mr. Krabs drags them to a stinky brine lagoon to go clam fishing. Oh, and the boat's called the SS Cheapskate, which is just perfect. So they're fishing, right? And SpongeBob accidentally hooks the back of Mr. Krabs' pants and rips off the dollar taped to his ass, sending it flying into the lagoon. That's when it all gets real, and out of nowhere, a live-action orchestra starts playing some dramatic music. Like, what the heck? Mr. Krabs begs them to stop, but they're like, lol, no! SpongeBob reels in the dollar, and just when Mr. Krabs thinks he's saved, a giant-ass clam jumps out of the water, snatches that dollar, and dives back in. Mr. Krabs loses it, sobbing like a baby. Squidward naturally couldn't care less and tries to snap him out of it, but nope, Mr. Krabs is too far gone. One lost dollar, and he is traumatized. Finally, Squidward's like, fine, let's get your dollar back, because he's just done with this. They start prepping for war with this giant clam, but 3 days pass and they've got nothing. SpongeBob and Squidward are fed up, so they devise this half-assed plan to trick Mr. Krabs. They grab a dollar from Squidward's wallet, mess it up with some coral blue No. 3 lipstick, and try to pass it off as the real deal. But Mr. Krabs isn't buying it. In fact, he's gone full psychotic by this point, tossing all the food overboard and offering a sandwich as a reward for the dollar's return. Like, what the hell, man? Squidward and SpongeBob try to escape, but Mr. Krabs catches them and straight up uses them as bait. The dramatic music kicks in again, and here comes the clam, dollar in its mouth. Mr. Krabs jumps right onto the clam's tongue, grabs the dollar, and gets swallowed whole. SpongeBob and Squidward freak out, but then Mr. Krabs' head pops out of the water. Turns out he fought the clam and traded his entire body, except his head and one arm, for that stupid dollar. So, kind of a happy ending for this one, I guess? To be fair, Krabs doesn't really need anything but his head and his arm. He's a lazy dude. But if he does lose everything, at least we know we can bring him back from the dead, like in the episode Seance Schmeance, which follows a botched seance. Alright, so it all kicks off with SpongeBob and Squidward sitting on their lazy ass watching TV. There's some seance stuff on the screen, and while Squidward couldn't give less of a crap, SpongeBob's already halfway to wetting himself. Old man Jenkins waltzes into the Krusty Krab and orders some random thing, a Rusty on Rye. Squidward, being the salty jerk that he is, tells Jenkins to order something that actually exists. Jenkins ain't having that though and starts getting difficult while SpongeBob tries to play nice, but guess what? SpongeBob has no clue what the hell a Rusty on Rye even is. Who the hell does? SpongeBob asks him for the recipe and Jenkins just says it's number 9 on some ancient menu and involves rye bread. Yeah, no kidding. Meanwhile, the other customers are getting hangry, and Mr. Krabs, seeing his precious profits about to tank, asks Jenkins to get the hell out. But when Squidward describes him as a snarky, unsatisfied customer, SpongeBob freaks the hell out. He's bawling his eyes out to Mr. Krabs, demanding to know why they don't serve this mythical sandwich. That's when Krabs reveals the Rusty on Rye is from some old joint called Rusty's Ribeye, run by this dead dude, Rusty Ricketts, who kicked the bucket 20 years ago. Later, SpongeBob's still obsessing over this sandwich. He calls Patrick to the Krusty Krab for backup, but Patrick, being the absolute fool he is, just wants to know why they can't eat the furniture. Like, what? So, after chanting some dumb crap off a mustard bottle, SpongeBob somehow summons the ghost of Rusty Ricketts, and Patrick freaks out and runs to get Mr. Krabs. SpongeBob tries to get Rusty to explain the sandwich, but it's like pulling teeth. The dude's all over the place, so he just shows SpongeBob instead. Turns out the sandwich is made from the weirdest stuff. Driftwood, speckle, and shellac. I don't even know what that is. SpongeBob tries it and it tastes like garbage. But for some reason, it smells amazing to ghosts. So a whole gang of them shows up and turns the Krusty Krab into a haunted mess. SpongeBob politely asks these ghostly nightmares to leave, but they're straight up ignoring him. Meanwhile, Patrick's still running around screaming like a maniac, and Mr. Krabs shows up just in time to see the glowing orb thing that brought these ghosts here. He shoves all these ghostly freeloaders back into the orb and pops it like a balloon. Krabs then tells SpongeBob to never try a seance again, saying ghosts are like relatives. They show up uninvited and never leave, which is very true. The next day, Jenkins finally gets his driftwood sandwich. He takes a bite, looks happy as hell, and SpongeBob's grinning like an idiot because he finally has a satisfied customer. Meanwhile, Patrick's still running around moaning like a damn ghost. Because Patrick is a moron half the time anyway, so this might be an improvement. Our next episode, Delivery to Monster Island, sees Patrick unknowingly walking Plankton into the Krusty Krab, kickstarting one of SpongeBob's most intense adventures yet. So Patrick strolls into the Krusty Krab like a total buffoon, blanking on whatever the hell he was about to order. Plankton, the sneaky little pain in the butt, is hiding on his back trying to sneak into the damn kitchen and spots a Krabby Patty just sitting there, ripe for the taking, while SpongeBob's too busy preparing his ingredients. Plankton thinks, "Oh hell yeah, this is my shot!" But then SpongeBob, not paying attention as usual, catches the patty moving but has no clue that Plankton's inside. Instead of eating it, he wraps that up for delivery. So SpongeBob starts hauling ass across Bikini Bottom, taking every stupid mode of transportation possible. It's like 80 minutes of this, only for this dumbass to realize the delivery address is literally next door to the Krusty Krab. Just as he's about to hand off the order, a random gust of wind blows him off course, and where does he land? Monster Island. SpongeBob doesn't notice anything at first, but then he sees the patty sneaking off again. Now they're both stranded on this freaky island, and SpongeBob's like, "Oh, and we gotta make this patty last if we want to survive." He even offers Plankton the first bite. But before anyone can take a nibble, a giant monster snatches the patty and swallows the whole damn thing, Plankton and all. SpongeBob, being the idiot hero he is, jumps in and wrestles the damn monster, actually saving Plankton's sorry ass. But of course, the beast chases them all over the island until it gets itself stuck like a dumb trapped between two trees. Things just keep getting worse. Plankton builds a shelter, but it's only big enough for his tiny ass. Then they think they've found safety, but surprise, it's inside another monster. And of course, they find a banana, which turns out to be the baby of some banana monster, because why not? Everything on this Nightmare Island is just some other monster anyway. Eventually, these two idiots decide to open a restaurant called the Cocoa Hut, serving coconut patties to the local monsters. The monsters love it, but Plankton, always scheming, realizes these monsters aren't going to let them leave because they want more of those coconut treats. So they tear apart part of their restaurant and use it as a raft to escape. But just when they think they're finally out of there, the whole island reveals itself as a giant sea turtle monster. In a weird-ass turn of events, they eventually land back at the Krusty Krab, somehow having been stuck on the island for 6 years. 6 years? But of course, the sea turtle monster follows them, and it just straight up devours the Krusty Krab. And Plankton is missing. Turns out Plankton is stuck inside the sea turtle monster's stomach, finally getting his dirty little hands on a Krabby Patty, only for the stomach acid to kick in and melt his ass down. Well, the little jerk is dead, so there's that. With Plankton out of the picture, the Krusty Krab needs a new enemy, and it gets it in the form of giant whelks. It's Whelk Attack. So Spongebob and Patrick are out in jellyfish fields minding their own business when they hear this weird noise. They turn around and holy hell, it's a giant stampede of giant whelks bulldozing through everything like it's their personal playground. These massive beasts leave SpongeBob and Patrick absolutely drenched in some nasty purple goo. SpongeBob tries to clean up, but they figure out these overgrown snails are headed straight for Bikini Bottom. Panic mode sets in and they haul ass to town to warn everyone. Too late. Bikini Bottom is already a full-blown mess. Whelks are chasing people, trapping them in sticky goo bubbles and straight up swallowing folks whole. And the best part? No one has a clue what these things are or where they even came from. The realistic fish head goes live on TV to give some breaking news, but mid-broadcast, he gets eaten by one of those slimy things. Meanwhile, Patrick's acting like a dumbass, convinced he's not scared of the whelks. So what does he do? Blows a raspberry at one, and he immediately regrets it because the whelk starts chasing his ass. He and SpongeBob book it to the Krusty Krab to let Mr. Krabs know what's up. But of course, Mr. Krabs, being the greedy money grubber he is, thinks these giant whelks are just a bunch of new customers. He's trying to sell them Krabby Patties, but things go south fast when the mother whelk shows up. Not only does she spit on his pathetic patties, she swallows Mr. Krabs, Squidward, and the entire Krusty Krab whole. SpongeBob and Patrick are out of there. They haul ass to Sandy's tree dome for help. Sandy, always the badass, lets them in after checking to make sure they're not undercover whelks or something like that. She gears up and gets the tree dome ready for war. She's got a whole plan to kick the whelks' asses, but just as they're about to make their move, the whelks crash in and swallow the whole crew. Turns out once they're inside the giant whelk, Sandy figures out these things are just sick. They've got some kind of cold. SpongeBob, being the weirdo he is, remembers how he cured himself when he had the suds. He pulls the same stunt on the mother whelk, and just like that, she shrinks down to a tiny, harmless little thing. SpongeBob cures the rest of the whelks too, and bam, problem solved. Everyone who got eaten gets spat back out, and the whelks go back to being one big happy family. Squidward's not having it, though. He's mad, ranting about how all of this insane stuff just went down because the whelks had the sniffles. And right on cue, one of the whelks sneezes all over his cranky ass, covering him in even more purple goo. That'll teach him to be difficult.